Hello all you beautiful creatives. This is part 2, the second video to this bar board. Yes, you got it, bar board. The board that any man can keep on his bar in his man cave or whatever. This was a special request from someone to come up with this design for her husband in particular. So in my last video, I did the compass that you can kind of see that's done here. And if you missed that, be sure to jump onto my YouTube channel, Gypsy Soul Creations, and check out the last video that I show you all the details of how to do that compass. So now in this video, we're jumping right into the mermaid. And for this piece, this part right now, I'm using the universal tip. I have it set fairly light, probably around a 5, I'm gonna say temperature wise. And I'm just lightly going over, kind of in a short stroking motion around the very outside of her body, kind of creating a little bit of line. I don't want it to be so dark and so definite. So I go back and I layer as I go along. So now I'm doing the same thing kind of down through her tail. I'm creating some of the scales throughout her tail, still not keeping my temperature too high. I'm staying right around a 5, maybe even closer to a 4.5. And I'm just kind of going through and I'm creating the lines that I want, because right now I just have them sketched out with a pencil. So once I get them lightly burned in here, I can go back and erase all of those pencil lines to see exactly what it is I'm working with. So again, the universal tip, just trying to go back through the scales. I'm getting some of the definite lines of the scales, and then I kind of tip the point sideways slightly where I can kind of drag just to create a little bit of a light shading effect, because I don't want it to be so dark. You don't want, if you have a high heat or you're holding it in one spot for a long time, you're really getting that dark burn, and I don't want to do that. I'd prefer to go back in and layer to darken it up. So I'm kind of jumping around here a little bit. This is just creating some of the definite lines for her face. I'm going around and just really lightly with a quick gentle touch creating an eyebrow, a closed eyelid, a slight piece of a nose, and a little bit of a mouth. I know it's hard to see at this angle while I'm working, but I promise I will give you a close-up better look as I go along here. So I also kind of gave her just a little bit more structure around her arms and such up at the top. Now I've turned my heat up just a little bit more. Now I'm closer to a 6, and I'm going back in and I'm going over some of the scales. I'm going around some of the outside of the tail, and I'm doing, again, I'm not holding the pen straight up and down in the air. I kind of tip it sideways so that I kind of use more of the side of that universal edge instead of the straight up and down. And I'm kind of dragging, I'm pulling away very quickly to kind of create this shaded look. I'm adding a little darker right now to give it a little more definition and depth in between each scale. I don't color in every scale, guys. Sometimes you really have to be aware of what you don't want to fill in. That is where you're going to get your highlight. That is where you're going to get things to look more dimensional. That is where you're going to get things to really stand out, is by creating some really, really dark parts, some lighter shading parts, and then the highlight, which is a non-burn area. Okay? So always be sure to, leave out some of those highlighted areas. And as I will go through this video, you will see some of my different ideas that just help me get through that without coloring in too much. So down through the bottom of the tail, now I've already created the scales, so kind of through the bottom of that tail, I want a little bit of line work. I'm just doing some really light lines. I'm coloring in some spots a little more than others so that I can kind of add a little more shading in certain areas to make them look bent over, to make them look curved, to have them stand out away from the other part of the tail, and definitely to stand out away from the scales. So now I'm just going to kind of go up and I'm going to start on her hair. And still with the universal tip, I've now turned it back down again, closer to a 5, 4.5, 5, and so that it's getting more of a lighter burn as I'm just starting to create some of the strands of her hair. So, I can go back through, like I said, and eventually erase the pencil line so that I know what I'm left with. Then I can go in and start creating different layers of shading and different texture techniques and things like that. So right now I'm just the universal tip around a 5, laying it slightly sideways, and I'm just kind of dragging, almost like you were sketching with a pencil in a sketchbook. I'm moving pretty quick and pretty light with this. Again, pressing too hard or having too high of heat right from the get-go sometimes can really just hurt you more than help you, because if you have such a definite burn, once it's there, it's there. So when you start out lighter, you do have the option, if you did something that you weren't happy with, you have the option to take a really light piece of sandpaper. Sometimes even an eraser will work if you have burned light enough for your first few lines, and you can kind of go over it and lighten it up. So now going back through, I'm creating a little structure for the rest of her body, kind of for her arm, for the hair that is going to kind of stretch behind her arm, around her arm, and still kind of just going with the, like I said, as if you were sketching with a pencil, with the light lines, the light touch of a hand, and the lower heat setting to really just kind of construct where it is I want to go with this piece, what how I want the hair to flow. Again, using a light hand and a light heat. If I put something somewhere that I don't like, I can erase those pencil marks, and if it's light enough, sometimes I can really lighten up those burn marks, or I could take a very light piece of sandpaper. For this, I'm gonna say 220, like a, you don't want a tough grit so that you can touch up anything that is out of place. So that was a close-up, better look, but now I've switched it up to the ballpoint tip. And I'm just kind of going around her, and I'm creating some bubbles. I want a bubble effect throughout the water. I've carried her hair kind of up through to the top part of this board, skipping the drip edge and moving right up towards the top, just for a little extra added effect. Now I've switched up to the angled tip, and I am just kind of laying it flat but pulling it quickly, and I just want to create a little more shading in certain areas, so that certain areas are going to be light again with the highlight, and certain areas are going to be a little bit darker. So I'm just really laying it on its, like flat down, and kind of doing the pulling effect with it to create a little more dimension, a little more depth to the hair, so that I can, create different textures as I go through. I'm layering. So again, I've turned my heat up slightly to about a 5.5. I don't want it to be really hot yet. Not that probably the highest on this entire piece that I will go is about a 6, because I don't want it to be charred. I don't want it to be black, although sometimes you do want that in a certain piece, because it gives you more depth, and more definition, and more of a dimensional effect. But again, okay, back to, this is about a 5.5, and I'm just kind of dragging it to add some shading and some depth to it, as you can see there. So now I've turned it up a little bit more, back to a 6. I've flipped my pen around, and just by using the tip, I'm creating texture through the hair. I'm just doing really, really short, not even an eighth of an inch, sorry, getting tongue-tied here, not even an eighth of an inch long, and I'm just doing quick little wisps around each strand of hair that come down, and now I'm just adding some more texture to her hair. It's giving it a little more definition. It's making it stand out from the other parts of her. It's making it stand out from, from her face, from her arm. And it's just adding a little something extra. And to me, being that, she's a mermaid, yes, I wanted it to look like hair flowing in the water, but I kind of wanted to bring in the texture of almost like, seaweed, or how the underlying vegetation of water looks when it's flowing in the water. You see all of those little pieces and sprigs kind of just going with the flow, and that's really what I wanted to create throughout her hair. So now, of course, we need water, guys. So let's jump into a little bit of water here. I just took my pencil again and I sketched out just a few waves that I want around this compass piece, so that it's so I want it to look like that is sitting in water. She's kind of floating underneath the water in the background, this mermaid, and that's why she is a little bit smaller. She is off in the distance, but for the compass to be up front and just standing at attention, I want to create some definite darker waves around the bottom of it, so that it really starts to make it look a little more real and stand out. So I start out with a lighter heat, turn my heat back down closer to a 4.5 to a 5, and I'm just kind of dragging. I'm going through and I'm dragging these lines to create a nice light line. Now I turn my heat back up closer to a 6, and now I'm touching on those lines that I've already created very lightly because I like the placement of them. I've done them light enough to decide whether or not I like the placement, and if I didn't, again, I would just grab that 220 sandpaper and kind of take it right off of there and start over from scratch if that's what I needed to do. It's okay, guys. There are no mistakes. We're here to learn. I do these tutorials so that I can kind of help teach you guys step by step how I do it. Let's learn from each other's mistakes and just love what it is we're doing. So after I start creating some of those waves, I turned the heat back down to about a 5, took my pencil, created a bunch of other lines, and at first with this same V tip, I am going through and I am coloring in the pencil marks that I actually made. That's where I'm making my my shading lines. And I'm not just doing a straight line. By laying it a little flat, I'm kind of moving my hand around in a circular motion, creating just some shading. So here I can erase the pencil lines, and then this is what I'm left with. You can see that I have those little light shaded pieces down there. So after I go through all of my pencil marks and do a nice light shading in a circular motion, I then go through with my pencil again, erasing the pencil marks I just had. Now I go back through with my pencil and just kind of draw around the outside of all of those lines, so that that's going to leave me a white highlight, and I color in very lightly again, maybe even turning it down slightly lower than a 5 to shade in between all of my pencil lines. So once I erase all those pencil lines, you can see all of the highlight strands through there. And last but not least, guys, we are almost finished with this perfect piece for the man cave bar. I just add my signature to the back of every piece I do. And for me, this is just my initials. It's a C with the G backwards that I do in a shape to make it kind of look like a little fancy heart, to say the least. So that is my signature. And I do it again on the back of every piece. It is your choice if you want to add something, your own little brand to the back of every piece, but voila. So this is the finished product, guys. I hope that you love it. If you want to learn more, be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel, comment below what you'd like me to do next, and as always, have a beautiful, beautiful day, my friends. Much love.